The wishing spell opens on the twins Alex and Connor in a class lesson about the importance of fairy tales. More specifically, how important the original Grimm's and Andersen's versions of these tales are. After much discussion, they are assigned homework to read and write about the lesson in a fairy tale of their choice. The twins discuss their options on the way home. It is then that we learn that their father was recently killed in a car crash, and they have been forced to move into a rental home. Their mother works constant double shifts as a nurse to make ends meet. For their birthday, their grandmother comes over, and one of their gifts is a family storybook, The Land of Stories. Almost immediately, the book begins to glow, and soon the twins find themselves falling through the pages into the world of fairy tales. They quickly learn that the best way to get home is the titular wishing spell, which requires them to travel to all the fairy tale kingdoms and collect famous items like Cinderella's slipper, Rapunzel's hair, Sleeping Beauty's spindle, a piece of Red Riding Hood's basket, etc. Life in this world has moved past the stories in the book. Goldilocks is an outlaw, Red Riding Hood is a princess, and no, she's never given a proper name, and the princesses Cinderella, Snow White, and Sleeping Beauty are now all queens. There is also a kingdom for fairies and a territory for goblins and trolls. As the twins venture into the world in hopes of finding a way home, they meet characters that are both familiar and strange, and some still searching for their happily ever after. I wanted to like this book. Fractured fairy tales are a personal favorite of mine. These stories survive because they speak to something fundamental. The fact that they can be given a new coat of paint every decade and still speak to us is a marvel in a world where hundreds of thousands of books are published every year, and the vast majority will never break the public consciousness. The Land of Stories puts a lot of importance on the original Grimm and Andersen version of the stories. In the opening scene in the classroom, the teacher rails against all modernization and how if people just read the originals, the world would be a better place. Even Alex and Connor are proud they know the originals, unlike their classmates. But for all its harping, the Land of Stories is decidedly ungrim. Many stories have been sanitized to the point that Disney would be proud. The few deaths that do occur either happen off-screen or are completely bloodless. There is even a scene where Goldilocks drags Red Riding Hood behind a galloping horse for several miles without giving her so much as a scratch. Grimm's tales were brutal. Cinderella's stepsisters mutilated themselves. Sleeping Beauty was raped and gave birth while in a magic coma. Rapunzel's prince was blinded and wandered the woods for years. There is even one called The Girl Without Hands, where the devil tricked a miller into chopping off his daughter's hands. That said, I'm not advocating that children's books be ultra-violent. However, if you are going to rail against the modernization of fairy tales, you don't get a pass on modernizing your fairy tales to cut out the uncomfortable bits. Personal preference aside, this book is just dull. It is devoid of any conflict. There's a plot about the evil queen from Snow White also being after the wishing spell, but it is periphery and only comes in at the very end. The main driver of the story is the collection of the items. However, this is remarkably lackluster. In the Land of Stories, there is no struggle, no conflict of any kind. When they fail to steal Cinderella's slipper, it magically slips into their bag. When they are running from Sleeping Beauty's guards, they just happen to hide in the room where she slept, and she gives them the spindle. When they need fairy tears, even their guidebook warns them the fairies rarely cry. They come across a fairy just sitting by the path weeping, and to collect the tears, they just happen to have a vial that they never noticed in the spine of the book they've been carrying around. For a story to have weight, to be interesting, to keep the reader turning the page, the characters must struggle, even suffer. As readers, we need to see them overcome, to grow. Even knowing that in the end it will all be okay, we need to see that dark night of the soul and the breaking of the dawn of hope. For me, the most galling example is when they are obtaining the crown of the troll and goblin kings. The twins are captured in a net trap and hauled off to the goblin and troll territories to be slaves. This is an excellent opportunity for them to use their knowledge of fairy tales to outwit their captors. Instead, they are released before they even spend a full night in slavery by the troll princess who thinks Connor is cute and wants a kiss. There is so much potential being ripped away by Deus Ex Machina. But perhaps the greatest sin is that it is just dull. Beyond a boring plot, it is emotionless writing. Here's an example. Connor dove underwater. He found Alex struggling under the gate. One of the straps on her bag had caught when she swam under it. She was stuck, and she desperately needed air. Connor swam down to her and yanked on her bag as hard as he could to set his sister free. But it wouldn't budge. He tugged harder, and the strap finally ripped off. He helped Alex to the surface. She was breathing harder than he had ever heard her breathe before. She had been seconds away from drowning. Alex is drowning in this scene. Where's the fear, the racing heart, the dimming vision, the burning lungs, the numbing limbs? This should be an edge-of-your-seat moment, the book demanding you read on to see the outcome. Instead, it's just a list of actions. For all the impact it had, the scene could have been removed and nothing would have been lost. What would have been better is if this had been a bonding moment. Off and on through the story, the twins had little pointless spats about getting home. This almost death would have been an excellent moment for them to realize how much they loved and needed each other. Imagine Alex kneeling on the dock, cold and wet, water pouring from her as her bag hangs limp from one shoulder, her heart pounding in her ears, limbs trembling with fading adrenaline, lungs burning even as she gulped down air, then reaching for her brother as tears of fear and relief run down her face. Instead, it's just a thing that happens and is never spoken of again. And that is the theme of this book. Stuff happens and is never spoken of again. The twins glide through the story in a protective bubble. I stocked this one on my bottom shelf. While not actively harmful like Twilight or 50 Shades, this land of stories is just boring. I cannot imagine continuing this series, nor would I recommend it. Thank you for your time. I know everyone's mileage will vary. Feel free to leave your thoughts.